Star's Journey, Chapter 6. I woke the next morning, my chest feeling heavy and dirt-laced every crease of my body. I groaned and looked around the cave to see Winter munching on a fish and reading his book. I sit up to see a few fish at my side on some leaves. I couldn't help but smile at the thoughtfulness of Winter as he kept reading, unaware of my awakening. I quietly get up, taking this moment of him being distracted to try and wash at least a little bit of the dirt from me. The waterfall did a decent job at getting most of the dirt off me, and what I couldn't get from the waterfall, a quick water spell did the job. I cleaned my clothes at the same time, using my fire and blaring sunlight to dry them off. My hair was dripping wet as I got dressed again, the sooner the better, of course. I was still squeezing the water out of my hair when I heard the panicked breaths and quick footsteps of Winter behind me. He looks at me, a little embarrassed from his panic, before straightening himself up, the fur on his back going down from his panicked position. I assumed he finally looked up from his book to see me missing. He clears his throat as he walks over to me. "You worried me." "Sorry," I say nonchalantly. "I didn't think it was much to worry about. I was right here after all." "No." I flinch at his stubborn voice. "I promised Emma I would protect you, so no running off." I smiled at him. I could see some sort of resentment towards Emma just for her being a pure-blooded demon, but it made me smile to see him trying to uphold that promise. That was, until I saw him glance up at me. I saw the emotion in his eyes before he put up the stubborn front. He clears his throat again, snapping me out of my thoughts. "What are you up to anyway? Fall in the water again?" "Hey, that's none of your business," I say, turning my back towards him. He chuckled and came to sit beside me. "But, if you really care, no. I didn't. I was just getting all the dirt out of my hair." I spared him the details. My response was enough. He nods and looks towards the trees. I notice his ears twitching at different noises, the way his paws grip the rocks below him. "How long have you been stuck in that form?" I say innocently. His ears perk up, his hair standing on end as he calmly looks at me. "For a few years now, since the accident." I felt shivers run up my spine with the way he says that. It seems to strike some sort of memory that I couldn't quite place. He caught my confused and almost fearful glance before his ears went back and he pawed at my leg. "Let's go for a walk." I shake my head and follow him as we start walking. "Where are we going?" I say, looking at the unfamiliar paths around us. "Nowhere," he says softly. I looked at him confused. "What? It's just nice to take some walks every so often." I nodded, and we walked in silence for a while. We walked for about 2 hours, just relaxing in nature and taking in the peacefulness. We took a break a little after the 2-hour mark, resting on a fallen-down tree covered in moss and who knows what. "When is that blue moon?" I say softly. Winter stretches out and hops up beside me. "It should be tomorrow night, or the night after. I think the night after." Winter looks around and then through some trees. "Hey, look at that!" He hops down and runs up towards some trees. "There's an opening over there. We could set up camp here instead. It would make for a nice spot to make the spell later on." I smile at him as I follow him into the clearing of trees. I didn't really feel tired, but I felt my body ache for the comfort of the ground, and I laid down, not really caring about anything else. Winter noticed the solemn expression on my face as I lay down, the grass messing up my previously neat hair. "I'll go get the stuff. You just relax for now, all right?" I nodded softly, my eyelids feeling heavy as I stared up towards the soft blue sky. I continued to stare up at the sky, my mind drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness. I felt oddly at peace lying here. I felt okay to lie here forever. The sky above me turned black by the time Winter came back with everything. I watched as the clouds passed over me time and time again, stars lighting up the night sky. Winter walks over to me, putting the stuff beside me and laying down, his paws spreading out on either side of him. He just relaxes beside me, no angry stare, no complaints about his paws, just calm relaxation as he leans against me slightly. "Thank you," I mumbled softly, not sure how to tear my gaze away from the sky. It was like I was in a trance, a million thoughts clouding my mind. I wanted to say thank you. I felt guilty about him having to get it all by himself. But he didn't seem bothered, almost empathetic as he knelt at my side. "Don't mention it," he mumbled. I continued to lay there in silence as the night became darker, and then later as the moon rose above us. Winter raised his head just to look at me before lowering it again. You need sleep too. I nodded softly. The only thought that went through my mind was how Emma and I laid in the grass just a few nights ago. I knew she was still awake when I talked. I saw the muscles in her face react to the words I was saying. But it did feel nice to be beside her. We continued to lay there. Eventually I fell asleep, but it wasn't until almost sunrise that my mind finally rested. I waked to the sound of rain hitting what almost seemed like a tin roof. My body was cold, but I wasn't wet. I was surprisingly dry. The rain was coming down hard, and it wasn't until a clap of thunder roared through that I opened my eyes. I almost prayed everything was just a bad dream, that I was still at our aunt's, and I was still right beside Emma and listening to rain as she slept. I sighed softly, seeing grass in front of me, my eyelids heavy with the weight of all my thoughts. I turned my head to see a silver-glowing force field around me in winter. The rain dripped off of it like glass, and nothing seemed to dim the light of it. It was pretty early in the morning still. The sun wasn't peeking through the clouds, and I couldn't see the horizon to see past the clouds, but I could tell by how bright everything seemed nonetheless. I turned to see Winter curled up and holding his paw to a spell circle as he read his spellbook. His ears moved, listening to my rustling as he read. He closed his eyes with a soft smile. Keep sleeping. I promise you're safe. At that moment, I felt more calm than I had in so long. I felt safe. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft droplets of rain, the roaring thunder in the distance, and the occasional page-turning of Winter's book. I opened my eyes softly, just to look at Winter as his calm eyes analyzed the pages as he read. I admired his strong demeanor as he read with confidence while upholding the spell, his soft eyes that were filled with a strong, stubborn front. I smiled softly, closing my eyes as my mind kept me awake. What did you look like before you were turned into a wolf? I say softly. Winter chuckles and smiles up at me. I'm sure you'll see soon, he said, returning to his book. I groaned and opened my eyes. You did the spell again, didn't you? I understood he used a spell to see into our future, to tell us what was about to happen. He shakes his head. No, I saw it last time. Besides, I don't like using those spells, and I don't need to anymore. I know you're safe with me. That's all that matters. His voice gets softer as he speaks. I smile, a soft humming noise coming from my throat as I relax. And that's just because I made a promise. Don't get any funny ideas. I giggle as he stumbles over his words. Sure, I say softly. I paused and looked back at him. How old are you? 16. Now just go back to sleep. You need it, he mumbled stubbornly. I could hear the concern in his voice. It made me smile more as I forced the loud thoughts away, trying to calm my mind enough that I could sleep. I slept for a long time that day. It was almost night again by the time I had woken up. The rain was long gone and winter had run off. Finally, I rested enough to get up. I remember getting up a few times, walking up to do something that I couldn't remember. I assumed by the small fish bones and campfire that I had at least gotten up to eat once. I lay on my back, looking up at the red sky. My body's feeling weak, but no longer tired. I'm sure if I cared, I could go back to sleep, but I didn't want to sleep any longer. I turned, about to get up when I noticed a small rock that wasn't there when I awoke previously. I sat up to get a better look at it, smiling as I noticed it was shaped like the head of a cat. I look around, confused as to where Winter had run off to, but smiled back down at the rock, knowing he got it for me. I put it in my sweater pocket and started the fire once again. I was cold, but I didn't want to use my fire to keep me warm, and it was nice to hear the snapping of the twigs as they turned to charcoal. The forest was very quiet, just the rustling of leaves if the wind blew. I sat there, playing with a twig in the fire, holding it from a distance and moving around the other sticks as they burned. It was dark before Winter returned. He came back holding a few fish and laid them in a pile of leaves I hadn't noticed before. Morning, sleepyhead, he says, softly, coming to sit beside me. I nod, lost in thought as I watch the flames. He pushes my arm with his head, looking up at me worried. You should eat more, he mumbles. I'm not hungry, I reply, just as quietly. My stomach hurt, but I didn't want to eat. The idea of eating just made my body ache. He huffs, a little angry, and headbutts my arm. Hey, I say, glaring at him. He sits, stubbornly looking at me, and points to the fish. I said I'm not hungry. I didn't like being bossed around. I wanted to just sit there forever, looking into the flame until my body couldn't. He growls at me. "You are hungry. You just don't feel like it because you're stressed," he said, pressing his head against my arm weakly, trying to push me. "And I get it, but you just have to eat." I finally give in and move as he continues pushing me. I feel a ping of guilt as I see him fall forward, but he didn't seem upset over it. He actually looked happy that I moved, an optimistic look to his eyes, much like how mine used to shine. "Fine, but only half of one," I say, turning and grabbing the stick I was playing with to skewer the fish. "Deal," he said, hopping back up and smiling as he came to sit beside me. I couldn't help but smile as he leaned against me. I take a while to just eat half the fish, taking my time to pick off the scales, cooking it a bit more than I needed, and taking my time to just eat it. He still seemed happy I was trying. I was feeling a bit more energetic after I ate, and it felt nice to at least sort of feel alive. I look up the sky, the crackling of fire and wood filling the night sky, the flames lighting up a small clearing much more than the moon did as it shone above us. I rest my hand on Winter's head as I watch the stars twinkle. I lay back to get more comfortable. Winter rested his head on my stomach, and I kept my hand on his head. His fur was soft, grounding, and nicely kept. It felt nice just to know he was here. I felt safe. It was second nature to start rubbing behind his ear again. He was still in his puppy form. It was cute, and I just wanted to cuddle him and make him feel loved. The moment my hand traveled to his ear, I could feel his eyes glaring at me. And the moment I started rubbing it, his leg kicked against my side. "Cut that out! Let me go!" he said, trying to push away from me, but having a hard time doing so as his leg kicks. "Come on, Star!" I giggle as I slow down to a stop. He pushes away from me, glaring at me stubbornly. "If you're actually human, why do you react like that?" I say, sitting up and smiling at him. He frowns and turns away from me. "I've been stuck in this form for a long time, so it's probably that. There isn't much research done on us half-bloods," he says, grumbling slightly. "Are you sure you just aren't a wolf?" I tease. He glares at me, snapping his jaws as he talks. "Yes, I'm sure, and I said you'll see it eventually, so hush." I laugh as he turns away from me, stubbornly once again. I smile as he does, before silence falls between us as my laughter dies down. "Come lay back down. I promise I won't do it again," I say softly, lying back and putting my arm under my head. He smiles and rests his head on my stomach again, and I continue to watch the stars above us. Winter relaxed, looking into the trees. I couldn't help but notice his ears twitch at every noise he could hear. The only thing I could hear was our breathing and the soft crackling of the fire. I look up at the moon above us, reaching my hand out, wishing for something. I didn't know exactly what, but I wished. "I promise it'll be okay," Winter said softly as I lowered my hand. "Tomorrow night is the blue moon, and we'll bring her back." I chuckle, getting an odd and concerned look from Winter. "It just feels like wishful thinking." I feel my breath get caught in my throat. Winter's ears tilt back as he looks at me. I continue to look up at the moon. "I mean, she's dead." I felt tears stream down the sides of my face. Winter whines softly, putting his paw on my stomach in a comforting way. "I know it feels impossible, but I'm sure flying without Emma felt impossible, and now look at you," Winter said softly, smiling at me. It did feel comforting, and his words held truth, but bringing someone back from the dead? I flinch as I feel Winter sigh and sit up to look at me. He could read my silence as I felt tears still dripping off my face. "I don't know what I can say to make it clear to you that I'm sure we can bring her back." I scoffed at his words. I didn't mean it in a mean way, just that it seemed so impossible. "I know a lot of spells, and I know a lot about the magic chaos that you may not, so please, just trust me." I sigh and rest my head back, looking down at the stars. "I trust you," I say softly. We lay there under the stars for a while. Winter fell asleep on my stomach, and I was too nice to move. I wanted to go for a walk, or fly, or do something to get my blood moving instead of lying down all day and night. Although the laziness felt welcoming as I laid there. So, for hours I did. I laid there, wide awake, watching the stars move, the moon fall, and the clouds make way for the morning sun. Time didn't seem so slow to me. The hours felt like minutes, and maybe those long blinks weren't just blinks. I opened my eyes, another long blink later to see the red of the sky, oranges and yellows fading from the sunrise. It was peaceful. Winter had fallen off my stomach now and was curled up at my side. My back ached, my wings begging to be free. I quietly stood up and looked at the sky, walking a few feet away from Winter before forming my wings and taking to the skies. I felt a pit in my stomach as I flew above the treetops, pain in my back that ran up and down my spine as the thought of Ava littered my mind. The idea of her spotting me as I flew filled my mind, and I lowered myself until I was somewhere in the middle. My wings felt better as I slowly flew in circles around the clearing. Once I became bored of testing the limits of my speed, I settled for just watching the rest of the sunrise from the branches of a tree. I glanced down at Winter, who was still asleep. I smiled, trying to think of something I could do to make his day better. After all, I needed this day to pass as soon as it could. But instead of taking time to plan or think of what to do, or even think of the spell we knew we had to use, I found myself still watching the sunrise, then the clouds as they passed. I had a million quiet thoughts running through my head, yet none of them were loud enough to become actions. Some of them were loud enough to echo between my ears, the hard-to-swallow thoughts of Ava killing us, and no one would be coming to save us. I flinch as I hear Winter yell my name, jumping up and looking around, almost running in circles. "Starine!" he yells, his voice sending chills up my spine. "I'm up here, you big puppy!" I yell, smiling and waving at him from a tree. He continues to look around before finding me and sighing. I hop off the branch and glide downwards, landing in front of him. He calmly walked up towards me to talk without yelling. "We should gather supplies for the spell. I still don't know if both of us have enough power to perform one, so the bigger the spell circle, the more energy it has in general." I finish the sentence smiling softly. "I know a bit of magic stuff." He smiles at me as we walk into the trees. "But what do we need to grab?" "Things with a lot of energy in them, or minerals," he mumbles, motioning to a leaf and then to a pebble. "Of course, we want the most valuable things we can get out here. Salt and flowers." "Does it matter what type of flowers?" I mumble, looking around. "Believe it or not, but it's better if they're purple, since that was your sister's soul color, right?" I tilt my head at his words. "What color was her fire?" he says, groaning and shaking his head with a soft smile. "Purple mostly, but sometimes it was just red," I say, trying to go over my memories. Winter stops and looks at me oddly. He shakes his head, dismissing it and nodding to himself. "Then let's focus on purple flowers." "Would it be safe for you to gather any unknown purple flowers, since you only really carry things in your mouth?" I say softly. He pauses and laughs. "It wouldn't be smart, but I'm sure if I don't actually eat them, I'll be fine. Besides, I think getting the salt out of the water would be a good learning lesson for you," Winter says, taking a small detour to the stream. "Since just summoning water makes it pure, try and figure out a movement spell with the knowledge of the first book and then evaporate it to get the salt." I groan and look back towards our campsite. "Oh yeah, guess you gotta go get that book." He chuckles and smiles at me as I start to walk off. "Hey," he says softly. I turn my attention towards him. "You're really strong. And I don't mean physically. To go through all this, to try and revive her, and I haven't really seen you break down since you crashed, so I wanted to tell you that I'm surprised about how strong you are. You're doing a good job." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, tears welling up in my eyes, and I turned away from him, a big sad smile on my face as I tried to force the tears back. "Thank you," I say softly, clearing my throat. Winter nods and starts walking off. I quickly fly back to the campsite, grabbing the book and her sweater, thinking I could use it somehow. I flap back to the stream, looking through the book as I fly, finding out hints towards mixing sigils of spells and with others to create different spells. I assumed that was the idea I had to go off of. I started mixing water and air sigils, half and half to start with, which made a cloud of mist where it was summoned. Next, 3 parts air and 1 water. It created a cloud. I could now see which sigil added what to the spell. Last obvious one was to test 3 parts water, 1 part air. and when summoned, just created a ball of water in the air before I dismissed the spell, and it fell, splashing into the ground below me. I was confused, to say the least, until I turned towards the stream, holding my hand out, trying to summon the magic from the water itself as I created the spell with my fire in my other hand. As I made the spell, I could see the water seem to pool where my hand was pointing. I smiled triumphantly as I moved my hand upwards, moving the water up, holding the spell in my other hand. I held the water in the air a little, confused where to go from here. I let go of the water, using the same method to move some dirt instead of digging to create a hole in the ground where I could separate the water. I looked at the spell circle in my hand, wondering about the different kinds of spell combinations. I shook my head, knowing I needed to get this task done. It was about noon, and I knew I had to do this before it was too late. So I moved the water into the hole, evaporating it with my fire, and then scooping out the small fractions of salt left at the bottom. I smiled as I continued this process for hours until Winter had come and found me at the stream. He had a large amount of flowers in his mouth, which he dropped beside the small scoop of salt I had put in a tidy pile. There was about a tablespoon of salt beside me, and Winter looked proud. "How long have you been at this? How long did it take you to figure out the spells?" he said, sitting beside me, examining the pile of salt. "I don't know, but I learned really fast. I found a hint towards it in the book, and seeing different spells people have used in front of me." I felt a lump in my throat as I talked, memories pushing themselves to the surface. I shake my head and smile. It wasn't hard to figure out I could swap symbols for other ones. I've experimented with adding more than 4 to a circle, though. I smile and look at the salt as he sits down, looking up at the sky. The sun was just below the trees. "You've learned much faster than I did," he said softly. "Trial and error," I say, turning my attention to the boiling water beside me. Winter looks at me, and then back at the sky before quickly looking at me and whining. I look at him confused as he motions towards my hand. "You know using your magic for so long can hurt, right?" I stop my fire and look at my hand, almost scared of how red it was. The palm of my hand looked one stage before blistering, and I'm sure I wouldn't have even noticed if Winter didn't point it out. "Apparently not." I smile and switch hands. "That would explain why Emma's hands are red all the time," I say softly. "She's always holding back her fire, so I assumed it just burnt her." "It probably does." I glance at him as he talks. "Just more internally than externally, like what you're doing." I nod softly. "Is she still going to be uncontrollable when we bring her back?" I mumble. "I don't know. She may be herself, she may be completely different." I sigh at his words and stand up. "We have enough salt, right?" Winter nods and gets up, grabbing the flowers. I open my wings, and Winter starts heading towards the paths again. I shake my head, grabbing the salt in one hand, pick Winter up in the other, and then flying over the trees, holding him tight. I land softly at our campsite, the sun just starting to set behind us. Winter sets the flowers down in a large circle. Scroll time. You should be able to hold the salt when we make the spell, but the bigger the circle, the stronger the spell. I know. He glares at me as I interrupted him. "Sorry." "It's all right," Winter said, chuckling softly. "Now, I'll make the spell with my fire. When the time comes, you'll add your flame to mine, adding as much power as you think you'll need to." I try and hide a weak smile. I feel he'd be concerned for my well-being if he knew how much magic I was prepared to put into bringing her back. "Don't worry, it won't be a permanent thing, just tiring." I nod softly. We waited around for a few hours till the moon rose above the trees. We had to wait till it was overhead. I stared in awe as it rose, flying up above the trees to see it better. It was a full moon, shining a bright purple color. It seemed to be a perfect reflection of her color. Winter let me fly above as I watched the moon, just letting me have this moment, but as it got closer, he called me back down. I looked at the ground, hesitant but hopeful. I didn't want to get my hopes up, and as I held her necklace tightly in my hands, almost praying that this would work. Winter opens his book to a spell written down on the cover and sighing as he looks back up at the moon. We had a few good more minutes until it was above us. He looked at me, softness and almost regret in his eyes before they turned to concerned. "Are you okay, Star?" He said my name so softly, and it sent shivers down my spine as I looked at him smiling meekly. I'm just scared. Excited, too. He tilted his head again. I'm excited because I'll get to see something I hopefully, won't ever have to see again. He nods, his eyes pressing me for more as his expression tightens into worry. I'm scared it won't work. I'm sorry. I promise I'll still put everything I can into the spell, but I'm just really scared. Starine. I flinch as he says my name, his voice strong and steady. I promise you, I've been studying this spell for so long, everything that can or could go wrong, and how to perform it, so please, trust me when I say it'll work. I nod my head slowly and look back up at the sky, Emma's necklace tightly in one hand and the salt in the other. Winter pauses as he double-checks everything, looking down at the spellbook as a silver circle of fire forms around the flowers. He looks at me and we nod to each other as we see the moon in place, its beautiful purple glow shining a normal white light onto everything. I hold my breath as I close my eyes, trying to harness every last bit of magic that I could. Winter continues the spell, chanting softly as the fire grows. I glance at him before he nods, and I try and add my blue fire to his, the magic in the circle glowing brightly. As he continued forming the runes of the spell, Emma's necklace and the salt glowed brightly, my eyes widening as some optimistic sinking feeling filled my chest. Like this was actually happening, that we had a chance. I closed my eyes, holding tightly onto Emma's necklace, adding as much of my magic as I could. Steadying myself with my feet, planting them into the ground below me. I made sure to have a good stance, steady and strong as I looked towards the spell. My body was shaking as my fire sparked and glowed much brighter than Winter's. I felt this overwhelming sadness in my chest, tears coming to my eyes as time seemed to tick by much slower for me. Fear laced in almost every tear as the spell circle glowed brightly. Once completed, it was like something out of a movie. The spell turned bright purple, vibrant yet dark, and in a flash of light, there was nothing. I felt my eyes widening, tears filling them and a cry filling my lungs, my demon form freeing itself, and I couldn't even fight it as devastation filled my senses. It wasn't before another bright flash of light lit up the night sky like the aftershock wave of a bomb. The purple from the moon faded, and there was a ball of purple flames in front of us. Tears streamed down my face as everything else seemed to fade around me. I kept my eyes on the ball of flames, purple, vibrant, and familiar flames as they faded. I couldn't help but fall to my knees as I saw Emma in front of me. Emma looked a little lost before her eyes settled on me. My body immediately felt so tired, my eyelids insisting I let them close, but I didn't even want to blink. I didn't want to take my eyes off her just in case she disappeared just as fast as she came back. Emma looked scared at first, then concerned, then excited as she ran towards me, her arms outstretched and tears streaming down her face. She leaped, throwing herself towards me, her wings and arms wrapped around me tightly, her tail wrapped around mine. Her hands dug into my back. I didn't even care about the pain. I was holding just as tight onto her. My fingertips digging into her shirt as I grabbed it tightly, sobbing into her shoulder as she did the same. Emma, I cried softly, compared to her violent sobbing. Her hands felt hot against my back, and I could see she was trying to hold back her magic. Starine, she cried through tears, her voice shaking as she did. Starine, I'm so happy you're safe. Her hands seemed to cool down slightly. So safe, she mumbled through tears, her voice getting caught on her tear-filled hiccups. Winter stood quietly looking through his book and notes, giving us time to cry and connect again, and about 20 minutes later I finally caught my breath, sitting up better and wiping some tears off of Emma's face, snickering weakly as it was covered in tears, red with bangs under her eyes and so full of life. Emma caught her breath slowly, and we sat there smiling weakly. I glanced at my hands, noticing the salt gone, and then noticing her necklace glowing softly. Emma follows my gaze, gasping slightly. You kept my necklace? She said, smiling at me. Of course! I wasn't going to lose it. You gave it to me before she killed you. I flinched as Emma's eyes flickered black before she shook her head and grabbed it from me, hugging me once again. "Thank you, Star," she said softly, smiling wide and then putting it back around her neck. I smiled as I noticed her acting just like she used to. There weren't any noticeable differences, and even if it always scared me, her uncontrollable magic almost felt comforting. "Please don't thank me. Winter did everything." Emma looked at me confused before I turned my head, confusion littering my tired expression as I saw a boy, sitting at the book, reading things, and being able to write new things down on a pile of notes beside him. He had deep gray hair, vibrant and fluffy, a darker complexion than that of Emma's and mine, but not by much. He had strong arms that seemed to press against his light gray t-shirt. I felt my cheeks go red as I continued to stare at him, the moonlight shining off his vibrant silver eyes. The necklace hung from his neck. The collar he wore was set down by his lap, the grays standing out against the brown camo shorts. He almost wore brand new white and black shoes. I couldn't help but smile again, a big smile on his face as he wrote. It seemed to light up his eyes even more. I saw his eyes twitch as he glanced at us before turning his head softly. I quickly looked down, feeling bad for staring and also awkwardly looking at myself, unsure why I was staring. "Are you guys okay?" he said, standing up and setting his stuff to the side. Emma stood up boldly. I flinched as she put her foot in front of me, blocking my view of him. I noticed her wings outstretched slightly. "Hey, I mean no harm. I protected her, didn't I?" Emma glared at him, her eyes turning black. "Who are you?" Emma said. I moved slightly to see Winter flinch, his foot stiff in the ground below it. "I guess you don't recognize me in this form." Winter chuckled softly and backed up. Emma's tail twitched angrily, and I stood up slowly, pushing Emma's wing out of the way. I was about to protest, angry at Emma for being so defensive, although I didn't really want to. It was nice to see her again, so I didn't really care how she acted. As my words reached my throat, I saw Winter turn into his wolf form again, although it was much bigger than before. Emma stood there, staring with an emotion I couldn't quite read, and I stood there staring in awe. "You," Emma said coldly. It made me flinch. I saw her fist tighten and her tail flickering. I saw Winter's ears tilt back, his tail curling to his side before he turned back into his human form. And then Emma looked back at me, almost confused as she gritted her teeth before looking down at the ground. "He did everything he could," I said softly, putting my hand on her shoulder. She looked between the two of us before sighing, her eyes wandering back to her necklace and then back to me. "I kept my promise. I made sure I kept her safe. I only found out we could bring you back after I had the chance to tell you," Winter says, taking a few steps back, obviously wanting distance between Emma and himself. Emma sighs and puts her wings to the sides again, relaxing as her tail falls back to the ground. "Thank you," Emma said softly, turning her back to Winter and walking away into the trees. "I'm going for a walk. I'll be back soon." I glanced at Winter and noticed him glaring at Emma before he shook his head. "Is she always that stubborn?" he says as I walk over to him. I looked towards where Emma had entered the trees and sighed softly. "No, not really, but I'm still really happy she's alive. And I mean, she despised you for the little information you gave her, so I guess her saying thank you is a good step in the right direction?" I say, putting my hand on his shoulder. "I guess so," he said softly. He flinches as I rest my head on his shoulder, my body feeling weak and sore. He looks at me concerned as I smile up at him. "Thank you. I really appreciate everything about this and sticking with me through it all. I'm sure there were other reasons you were practicing and studying that spell so much," I say, looking up at the sky. He nods softly and follows my gaze and watches the moon with me before my body is leaning enough on his shoulder for him to notice. "How much power did you put into helping me with that spell?" I look at him to see the concern in his eyes as he stares into mine. I couldn't help the redness that filled my cheeks before I looked away in guilt. "Every bit I could," I said softly. He growled, which made both of us jump at first before he shook his head and looked at me. "That wasn't a smart idea. You're going to be so tired tomorrow, and if you're lucky, just tomorrow and not for a week." He glared at me as I smiled. "I don't care," I said softly, as I look at the ground for somewhere soft to sit. As I was sitting down, Winter sighed, mumbling softly, "I do." Before he looked back up to the sky, I remember staring at the clouds as they passed over me before I fell asleep. It felt so welcoming, so peaceful, and so needed. I remember hearing Emma and Winter talking as I slept. Their voices were soft and peaceful amongst the rest of noises in the small clearing.